We are live. How are you doing this week, Lolo?
Wonderful. And yourself, Perry?
I'm doing great. And I am so excited to talk about our episode today here in Come Follow Me, episode 5, maybe 5.1 or something like that. I'm not really sure how I want to number this one, but exciting stuff because this is so big. We have to do a two-parter.
I was going to say, this can be like the last Harry Potter movie, the first half and then the second.
Pretty much what we're playing with here, and hopefully this is more when they did that with Harry Potter and not when they did it with like the Hunger Games or trying to get into I guess it failed miserably with Divergent, so by the time they got to that it was already broken. But yeah, so hopefully we are putting forward something that's going to be really great. I think that these two topics are so big and so interesting in the space of Book of Mormon criticism and Book of Mormon apologetics that each one deserves its own space, and I'm really excited. So
me too.
Let's get cracking into this. Calling this episode, at least nominally, it'll probably have a different title by the time we get it to YouTube because in my efforts to try and be SEO friendly, but we're at least calling this one on the slides evidentiary highs and lows, because we are going to talk about the best Book of Mormon evidence, and then we're going to talk about something that I think is a bit more a bit better for the critics, let's say.
But watch out, this is some pretty solid evidence.
We're going to see just how solid this actually ends up getting. All right, so let's talk about what the best evidence for Book of Mormon historicity. And I am with the apologists on this one. I do think that this particular piece of evidence is the single best piece of evidence for proving Book of Mormon historicity. If you wanted to start building a case for that, this is the place to start, because nothing else that apologists have presented comes close to the quality of this evidence. Now, we're going to rate that quality on a more absolute scale here as we go through. But I do want to hand it to the apologists. This is the best for Book of Mormon historicity.
Round of applause.
Round of applause. All right. So what are we starting with here? Well, we're starting with this notion that in 1 Nephi chapter 16, verse 34, you've got the family of Lehi on their caravan. They're coming southeast. They've been heading in that direction, and they're going to come to a place called Nahom. And this is unique because in the rest of the story, when they come to a place, they have named it. So they call the place Shazer, they call the place Laman, they call the place Lemuel, all that. They're doing the naming as they go through.
Right.
Now they're going to get all the way here, and they're going to call this place, or they're going to say that this place is called Nahom. It goes to this passive voice, which may indicate that this place was already called Nahom by another group of people.
That was going to be my question. Is I don't remember, because I've been rereading. I don't see anywhere where it says, like in the Bountiful, and we called this place Bountiful. It was this place is called. So that was always my question, was who named it? So
yeah. So they're doing the calling here, but then with Nahom, it does switch to that passive voice. We'll talk about that as quality, just as you said, that this is one of those things to kind of explore because it's different, it's unique. And hey, what are we going to we find in southwest Arabia, there at the bottom of the peninsula, we find a place where there's this altar, and it has this inscription of those three letters, NHM, those three consonants. And if you know anything about this type of writing, you would write the consonants, you wouldn't write the vowels at that point in time. You had to kind of have the cultural understanding to know what the vowels would actually be. And so we have NHM. We have these NHM altars that date to around the time of Lehi, and they're found around these burial sites, really close to these big burial sites. Mm-hmm. And it's directly west, because when they get to Nahom, they're going to take a left turn, they're going to head east. It's directly west of a pretty viable candidate site for Bountiful, for the place that they're going to call Bountiful later on. And so you've got these lines of evidence that come together that may suggest that we have this archaeological find of the site of the place that was called Nahom. And all that comes together for, as Neil Rapley says, we're going to bring this together, and it creates a compelling context for this portion of Nephi's account in southern Arabia. Mm-hmm. And we'll see how compelling that actually is as we go through this. But I do want to actually hand it to Neil Rapley here. He's right. This is about as compelling as it's going to get as far as external evidence for the Book of Mormon.
Okay, I'm down.
All right.
Convince me, Neil.
Let's do it. So this is the way that apologists are basically proposing that Lehi traveled. So we're starting at Jerusalem. Bear in mind, we're going to come back to this, try to reiterate this a few ways through. The one place that we know for sure of where Lehi and his family traveled in this whole journey, the single site that we know of for certain where it was located is Jerusalem. We know where the Red Sea is, but because it's so expansive, we can't know for certain exactly where they came to that they called the borders of the Red Sea. We know they were in the wilderness by the borders of the Red Sea, but we don't know for 100% certainty what that site actually was. And so then everything else after that, because it's not specifically necessarily named that way today, or again, like the names haven't been carried over for so long, none of the names specifically match per se.
Right.
We're kind of doing a little bit of work trying to reconstruct this route. And this is what apologists have put forward as that route based off of certain lines of evidence that they try to put in to say, hey, this site kind of looks like this place over here. They found a candidate site for, I believe, Shazer. That's in a, it might be the Valley of Lemuel. Maybe it's the Valley of Lemuel, where it basically runs through this carved canyon. And there's this river that runs through there. And it's one of the only places on the peninsula where there's a river that essentially runs year round. If you look at the pictures for the site, though, yeah, it's.
I was gonna say that's such a esoteric's not the word, but it's like, oh, okay, well, there's this river, so let's just put all of our eggs in this one river basket. I mean, to me, that just seems like a shot in the dark, because there's got to be more than one river in the Middle East. I'm just saying.
I mean, there aren't many bodies of fresh water that have kind of the river type flows in the Arabian Peninsula. So to be fair, you're working with a pretty small set of, relatively speaking. I mean, if you look at this map here, one distinct feature you may notice about the Arabian Peninsula is just how brown it is, and a general lack of lakes and those sorts of things. So where would the rivers really come from per se? So where these rivers come from usually is they are the result of the monsoon season. And you just get these heavy rains, pouring rain, and then you'll get a river runoff essentially from those heavy monsoons. And that's where these usually like half a year, like very temporary rivers show up. This place that they're proposing as the Valley of Lemuel is interesting because there is a river that runs pretty much the whole year. The thing is, though, it's basically a trickle when it's not in like the monsoon season. And at the monsoon season, it's, to call it a river, like if you're thinking of like a river in the US, it would basically be those like streams, those that eventually grow into becoming a river, or the places where you've got like a little tributary off to the side that you can basically jump across.
So we're not talking about the Mississippi.
We are definitely not talking about the Mississippi. We're not talking about anything too terribly impressive here as far as like on a river scale. We are not talking about the Euphrates. We're not talking about the Nile.
We're talking maybe Lehi left the hose on.
Maybe Lehi left the hose on kind of a river for most of the year, with it getting a bit more flowy at other times.
Fair enough.
Yeah, it's so this comes up in the story because Lehi calls the valley Lemuel, but then he calls the river Laman, and he tells Laman, hey, I want you to be flowing continually into the Red Sea, or flowing into the fountains of righteousness as this river is flowing into the Red Sea, right? And I could see Laman being like, really, Dad, like this thing, this is what you want to compare me to? All right.
Thanks. Maybe it wasn't a compliment. At
a certain point, when you look at some of the things apologists propose, like maybe Laman and Lemuel had a point. Like maybe like
I mean, I have little brothers, and I'm just sitting here thinking, I kind of get it, Layman. I kind of get it, Lemuel.
Yeah, it's kind of like when you're a kid and you like vibe with SpongeBob and all of that. You like you want to be like SpongeBob, and then as an adult, you're like, oh, I totally understand Squidward. Like it
Yep,
just
exactly.
I get Squidward
Yes.
is that's what this is.
So
All right.
essentially, Nephi would be SpongeBob, and Layman and Lemuel would be Squidward.
That is the official position of this podcast. Yes.
That's what I thought. Okay, good. I like it.
Yeah.
I'm down.
Yeah, and I guess that makes Sam Patrick. I don't know. All right. So there, just to be clear though, like the quality of evidence that we're dealing with for most of this route is basically like that for the Valley of Lemuel. That is the level that we are on. We find a site that sort of kind of remotely, distantly, potentially, if you squint at it hard enough and really strain what the text is saying, kind of looks like what is said in the Book of Mormon. And then we move on. And that's what we find through all of this. And it's hard to tell with this map, but this route is not an easy one to travel at all.
I was going to ask what the terrain was going to look like here.
Yeah, it's really, I mean, trying to like reconstitute this route on something like Google Maps and trying to track the terrain is a labor of intense tedium that I have neither the time nor disposition to dive into. Let them present a good case first and show me that this would be a very travelable route. I mean, like maybe the Liahona was guiding them through like the very specific easiest spots to go through on this whole way down, and that's how they were able to make it through. But this terrain is not friendly.
And these people are having children, and they are, and obviously, you know, a la Ishmael, they've got some elderly folks happening. I just, I question the actual travel ability with what they've got going on.
It would be,
because these are not adventures. These are they've had a fairly easy life. They're a little bit more affluent, and all of a sudden they're going to become doomsday preppers going through this very untravelable terrain with babies and old people. Got it. I'm down.
You've got unreliable weather in terms of having rain availability. I mean, apologists will pop in and say that they find certain amounts of large game in some of these areas that they could have hunted, but I definitely question in what kinds of abundance and availability those would be in, and they make their case. But
here's my question. I'm sorry, I keep talking over you. So I remember at one point when Lehi and his posse, his crew, his homies, leave Jerusalem, they're discussing how they're not wilderness kind of people. They're eating raw meat. So it just doesn't, I question their ability to be able to have survived through all of this.
Yeah, ultimately their survival, even in the context of the text, like you're talking about, they do describe eating raw meat, which has its own peculiar issues. They talk about the Lord sweetening the meat so that they wouldn't have to make much fire,
right,
as they were traveling through. So, yeah, their survivability without divine intervention every step of the way would be incredibly low. But the text does assume pretty much near constant divine intervention in this. To be fair,
that's if only the cast of The Walking Dead had that.
Right. Now, this moves us out of the realm of any sort of amount of historicity, right? And that's not a statement of this didn't happen. It's that we have no way of interrogating events to really validate that divine intervention was at play in this story. So, assuming that the events did happen and there's a historical core to the overall story, though, we might be able to say, hey, like their stop at Shazer was historical. But maybe some of the stuff that they did along the way to get there, we wouldn't be able to put into the camp of historicity, even if those events happened, just because we don't have a way of interrogating divine intervention as a historical event. There's no way of validating or even showing that divine intervention didn't happen. So, which apologists love. They love the, hey, show me that this thing didn't happen, right? Usually
Prove
armchair
Santa's
apologists are
not
doing
real.
that. Prove Santa's not real is exactly the sort of armchair apologetics that we sometimes deal with in this space. Okay. We're going to go over and try to reconstruct this route using the text of the Book of Mormon itself. But just to say, like, there are examples of the of apologists using certain pieces of evidence to try and say that this site or another is the site that's described in the Book of Mormon, and that the quality of the evidence is usually in line with what we're finding with the Valley of Lemuel and the River Laman. Nahom is its own separate category. I will say that Nahom is in a league of its own, quite above and beyond these other claims of sites, barring Jerusalem, because we actually do know where that's at. Let's talk a little bit about the actual inscription found at the temple in Marib. So actually, I do want to go back here just real quick. This site here that's proposed for Nahom is actually pretty close to, it's in the Marib area. It's really close to Sheba as well, which, if you remember the story of Solomon building the temple and all of that, the Queen of Sheba playing a role in that particular story.
Yeah.
It's interesting that they're that close, and there is there's no interrogation of that story in the text.
I was going to say it's not mentioned.
Yeah, it's not, obviously that's not like a break in like any sort of like historical analysis of that. It could be a historical account and they don't mention that particular story for some reason or another. It's just interesting that there is no mention of where they're at and being that close to basically the place where a significant figure in the history of the Kingdom of Israel and the Kingdom of Judah, the building of the temple in Jerusalem, no mention of that particular association with their journey here.
How close would they have been? Are we talking a day's travel?
Yeah, not far at all. Depending on where they actually turn left, it's potentially
they turn left at Albuquerque.
They turn left at Albuquerque, right? And where Albuquerque is, they're not too far away from Sheba. So, and this part of what the apologists are proposing is that Lehi and his family followed a pretty well-traveled trading route here, the frankincense trail, and that's what they're kind of following along with. That works for Nahom, for the Nahom claim. It doesn't necessarily work for all the other stuff as cleanly. And the text itself does not really support the notion that they were following a well-traveled trade route. It doesn't explicitly disconfirm that they were following a well-traveled trade route, but you wouldn't really...
This route that is the horrible non-travelable route they're saying that this is a well-traveled trade route?
There's parts of this that are on the frankincense trail, yes.
Okay.
And I have admittedly not gone through the effort of trying to reconstruct what the frankincense trail actually was. And
no,
this
it's
is
still
because I don't find this whole line, like, even if we were to substantiate this particular like Nahom claim and show like, yeah, no, this is actually the site that was intended by the text of the Book of Mormon. Even if we got that far, I wouldn't be sold on the rest of this yet. Apologists have a lot of work to do. And honestly, if like look at the quality, go on to Evidence Central, look at the quality of the Nahom article and the details that are in that, and then compare that to some of these other sites, and do just the barest amount of research outside of Evidence Central for what they're saying. And yeah, it doesn't bode well, honestly, for the rest of their claims. So anyway, just want to make the point that we're in an interesting site. We're on the frankincense trail, though, when we're talking this Nahom site for sure. Like, it's definitely frankincense trail, and it's a big trading site, very long, populated for a very, very long time. And when we say big, it's big for the region and for the time, but big. This was an important spot because if you're going to go deeper up, up north into the peninsula, you're going to have some preparation work that you're going to need to do before making that journey. You've got some ports nearby. You've got access to some larger cities like Sheba that are nearby. So all of that's coming together for making this place pretty dang well populated and well traveled,
Okay.
even at the time of Lehi. So we have these altars that are at a temple that are in the area. And what these altars are super exciting for apologists for is that you can see Book of Mormon Central did these effects here on the left-hand side of this altar. You can see these highlighted characters. Those characters spell these consonants, NHM. And in the Semitic writing, in this ancient Semitic writing, you would put the consonants. You would not put any of the vowels in that. So you would designate the consonants. And you'll notice Nahom has N-A-H-O-M. Your characters, your consonants are matching exactly with this. So super exciting, right? We found the same characters from the Book of Mormon in a place that fits, and that's great. Just very compelling, very interesting evidence, as Neil Rappley puts it.
Now I have a question. So if this NHM, let's say this name of this place had started with a vowel, would they have also left that out? Could it be, A in da 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 da, or does this mean that the word begins with an N? Is my question.
My understanding is that if there was a vowel that preceded the first consonant, it would have to be culturally understood that there was a vowel sound before the first consonant. That the first thing you would write is still the first consonant. Now, I am definitely open to being corrected on that because I am not a scholar of Semitic languages. I would not be able to read this inscription myself on this altar.
I barely speak English, so I'm just saying for me.
Yeah, if this were like an ancient Japanese altar, I might be able to take a stab at some of the characters on it. Reading old Chinese characters is a little bit of a challenge for me. But Semitic languages, even if we were to do runics, I'm just not trained in that. I don't know how to go about doing that. And when it comes to Semitic grammar, Semitic writing systems, I know enough to have a conversation with your typical apologist. But when it comes to making the actual interpretations off of that, oftentimes I just kind of grant what the apologist says that the thing says, just as for the sake of argument. It's like I can't say otherwise, so I'm going to grant that point to you. Let's go from there.
But even with that point granted, there's still a lot of work to get from point A to point Z.
And let's talk about that because we do have these characters, and I have always granted that these characters are in fact on this altar. But I've also noticed that there are a lot of other characters around these three characters. So what's that about? And so I actually was able to dig up. It's hard to actually dig this up. I had to go through 3 or 4 different links, but ultimately still on Book of Mormon Central. So credit there. I was able to find the article by Marvin Ashton that kind of kicked off bringing this whole Nahom Nim altar conversation into the realm of Mormon apologetics. And this here is taken from that paper. This is on what's called Altar 2. There were 3 altars. This is Altar 2. And we've got the transliteration of those characters. Well, hello.
That's Fizgig. She really has some very deep feelings about Nahom. She is an apologist. We're working through it though.
We're gonna work through this here.
Yeah, she's excited. She's really excited about what we found tonight.
I can tell. I can hear the joy. So yeah, and this paper does have the transliteration of what came off of Altar 2 of these 3 altars, and he also was kind enough to provide a translation. Whoops, I accidentally clicked the button. There we go.
It got a little warm in here.
Gotcha. You have those brutal Texas winters going on there.
That's exactly right. It is a brutal 55 degrees outside. Fahrenheit. Fahrenheit.
So it's 10, 11-ish degrees, I believe, 12 maybe. Anyway, setting that aside, it's about what it is over here as well right now. Anyway, what this altar translates to is Beathar, son of Sodom, son of Nahom the Nimite, has dedicated to Ilmaka Faryad by Athtar and by Ilmaka and by Dat Himyan and by Yadail and by Maadi Karib. And I mispronounced all of that, so please forgive me.
You know what? It sounded awesome to me.
You know, we're all not really knowing how to actually properly pronounce these. But that was my stab at that.
I loved it.
The characters that we're really excited about is where it says, you know, Beathar, son of the Nimite. So it's NHM, and then there's an additional character, this Y character, and then an N. This Y character and the N afterwards suggests an ite, like what we use as ite in
ITE, yeah.
Yeah, reading. Like if we were to have Nephites written out this way, we would have those two characters serving, it would seem, as the end of Nephite. And it would probably be like the character for N and F, that would be Nephi, and then you'd have the ite for the YN. If I, you know, am even close to understanding how this is supposed to work, that seems to be the way that this would go. So we have Nimite, which suggests a people of Nim, a people of NHM. And if there is a people of NHM, a people of Nim, then there very likely could be a place, or very likely was a place of Nim, a place of NHM. And if there, and so then a very logical next question would be, okay, we have what is likely a designator of there being a people and a place of NHM. Does this, would this have been the right time, right? Is this much later? Is this much earlier? This is a people that died off. What's the deal? And it happens to date right to the right time, for right when Lehi would have been passing through the area. So we're good on that front. What this doesn't necessarily indicate is where the borders of the place of NHM would have actually been. And so apologists kind of go with this, it was nearby, and they use what is the historical like borders of the Nim people as like essentially trying to make the case of this is where they were. And that's fine-ish. But it's, remember, one of the pieces of evidence that we're using is that, or that apologists are using, is that it's directly west of a candidate site for Bountiful, of like what they consider one of the better candidate sites for Bountiful. And when the place that we're dealing with is now like larger and more expansive, and so we don't actually know where exactly they would have been in this so many, you know, square miles area that they could have possibly been at, it casts a little bit of doubt on the validity of maybe that Bountiful candidate evidence, which is supposed to help to support this evidence as being a sign for Book of Mormon historicity. So yeah, just worth noting, again, it doesn't disprove that this is the NHM intended by the text of the Book of Mormon.
Now, is there, how close are these three altars to each other? Are they all in the same general area? Could they denote a boundary of any type? Or
no, these were gifts from a guy who was from the Nim tribe, they're all given to this temple basically. And so they're at this site. They're not at all meant to designate like a site or designate like where
so we're not talking located. Cornerstone indication or anything. Okay.
We are talking a gift from a dude.
That's very nice of the dude.
Yep. That's what the translation of this inscription on the top of the altar says. This is a gift from a dude dedicated to these gods.
Awesome. Love it. Okay.
It's a gift from a dude from a tribe who dedicated to these gods. And that's it. And what we're excited about is that is not the dude, not the gift, not the gods. We're excited about the tribe, and
The
nothing else is
NHM.
really, yeah, nothing else is indicated by this. But it seems really exciting to say, hey, we found these characters and this indication of Nahom at this site, and it happens to date to the right time and all of that. But when we break down what the altar actually says, what the inscription itself actually says, I felt a little bit less excited about what's here personally.
Yeah.
It's a gift from a dude. That is what this says. And there's, yep.
I mean, I'm not saying anything. I'm not disproving. I'm not discounting. I am just saying that near the college where I went, there was a giant plaque next to a huge metal hot dog that said da 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 gift from Harry's. Just for the talking about this giant hot dog mascot. How do we know that this isn't? I mean, you know, obviously this is a temple, and so it's something holy. But is there any way to prove that calling him a Nemite would be indicating his tribe, his ethnicity, his area? Maybe could it be a title? I'm trying to grasp at straws because how do we know how accurate that is my question. Because in 2,000 years, when Dallas is discovered by archaeologists, I don't want them to think that we worship giant wieners. But I'm not saying that this is that ridiculous, but there's no foundational support to prove that this Nemite group or area, is this the only evidence of it?
So the Nemites actually have a great deal of evidence to support their existence.
Well, no, the Nemites, yes, but I mean, in this,
and so it actually, the way that we would say that this dude was of this particular tribe and feel pretty confident about that, besides the tribe designator YN at the end of the name, the way that we would feel confident about that is because we know that this people group has existed for a long time, and has lived in that region for a very long time. And so, yeah, this guy giving this altar to this temple, being a part of that group, lines up pretty neatly. It would be like finding, if you had that statue or the wiener dog cart statue, and it was from Harry such and such, the Armenian, and you're like, oh, hey, there are Armenians, they, and all that. And this guy was just known to be from Armenia. And he is.
But then that would indicate that Armenia was in Texas, because he gave this statue.
And that's kind of actually touching on this issue, is that it does not indicate the bounds of where Armenia would be, right?
That's what I'm saying. Is like, so for this,
it constitutes the evidence of the existence of the people group that we know existed, but in terms of actually establishing where that people group was located, it does nothing for that.
Okay.
In and of itself. We would have to look at
question.
Yeah, we'd have to look at additional evidence, and the boundaries of where the Nim people lived and have lived and all that have changed throughout history. So where were they at the beginning of the 6th century BCE? Who knows, really, is what we're playing with at that point. We don't rightly know for sure exactly what the boundaries would have been. They've kind of always been around Southwest Arabia, so somewhere in that. But again, we're going to get into all this, but what part of our evidence is going east and arriving at Bountiful, when that's part of what we're using to try and constitute this, that we've now made our down the line supporting evidence shakier because of now the fuzziness and what these boundaries would have been.
Well, I'm sold personally.
It's extremely compelling, I know.
I'm sold.
Let's talk a little bit for a minute here about something similar, and we'll talk about the quality of what we're dealing with here, and whether or not you should be sold. So
fair enough.
you may have read this little epic poem. It's not too terribly well known, and definitely does not have a movie adaptation in which you can see Brad Pitt's butt, called the Iliad.
I faintly I faintly remember. You know what? That shot was very important to me in my early 20s. I'm just saying.
And it was important to me in my mid-teens. Um, so the Iliad is pretty famous for detailing the destruction by the Mycenaean Greeks of the city of Troy in about the 13th century BCE, and it was written by Homer. We don't know too much about the historical Homer, whether or not there actually was a historical Homer, if there was just one dude, if there were many dudes that constituted all that. There's a lot of scholarly debate on that. A lot of what I've seen kind of goes around to maybe there wasn't just one dude, but that's neither here nor there for this particular conversation. What is important is that the Iliad was written in roughly the 8th century BCE, so about 500 years after the events it describes.
Okay.
So as we got the poem kind of passed down through time and all that, as it goes through the centuries and the millennia, the poem is understood as being myth, and to the Greeks, the Mycenaean Greeks, it would have been understood that way, but that myth would have had religious significance. To us, it would have lost that religious significance, but still understood as myth. And
Got
so
it. Okay.
we lost evidence of the existence of Troy, of this city that's described in the Iliad. It just kind of disappeared from history. And so for a time, it was thought that because the only place we were really finding this Troy was in mythic sources, such as the Iliad, that the city itself was myth, and that it didn't actually exist as a real historical place. But there were some people who thought, no, that is the historical kernel to this story. Like the other stuff can be myth, the stuff with Achilles and Hector and all of that, that can be myth. But Troy itself and its destruction, I'm going to bet that that is actual history. And that there was actually a city called Troy. And so there was a guy who used in part the story of the Iliad, the story of Troy is contained in the Iliad, and the description of that city to hunt down a bunch of different candidate sites. And then there was another guy who was like in the region who decided to try to take advantage of the first dude who had the Iliad and was super excited about it to fund his own excavations. And they eventually found a site that matches the description of the city of Troy as found in the Iliad, and we have now confirmed that particular site as being what is now known as Troy 2. There's like Troy like 1 through 9 or something like that, kind of as the city expanded or changed or all of that. It's its whole thing, and not an area of archaeology that I am much more interested in getting into beyond this conversation. So my reading of the British Historical Museum's articles went about this far.
Fun. Got it.
So there's been a lot of work, obviously, that's been done to confirm that this site is the Troy that's intended. But it's clear from the evidence that we have today that the site of Troy, as intended by the text of the Iliad, is this site that was discovered by these a couple of archaeologists that were led by the Iliad there.
That's really cool.
This is a super cool find, right?
Yeah.
And what I find interesting about this is that we were able to take the actual text of the Iliad and use it to drive our find. Okay. Right. What I'm curious about is if we use the Book of Mormon, use the text of the Book of Mormon, can we do the same thing? So let's try to get to Nahom using the Book of Mormon, shall we?
I'm ready. Let's go.
All right. So let's start in 1 Nephi chapter 2. This is the first part of their journey. And they're going to go to, they're going to start at Jerusalem, and they're going to travel a few days towards the Red Sea. And they are going to get to the Valley of Lemuel and the River of Laman. Would you mind just kind of going over 1 Nephi 2, verses 4 through 10?
1 Nephi 2, 4 through 10. I would love to. 1 Nephi, you said 2, 4 through 10, correct?
That is correct.
Oh man, I feel like I'm in Sunday school. Okay.
This is where we're doing. We are actually reading from the scriptures today, people.
Everyone should
be happy.
And it came to pass that he departed into the wilderness, and he left his house and his land, and the land of his inheritance, and his gold and his silver and his precious things, and took nothing with him, save it were his family and provisions and tents, and departed into the wilderness. Verse 5. And he came down by the borders near the shore of the Red Sea, and he traveled into the wilderness in the borders which are nearer the Red Sea. And he did travel in the wilderness with his family, which consisted of my mother, Sariah, and my elder brothers, who were Laman, Lemuel, and Sam. I got 4 through, I'm sorry, what were the verses?
Through 10.
10. Oh, there it is. I'm sorry. And it came to pass that when he had traveled 3 days in the wilderness, he pitched his tent in a valley by the side of a river of water.
Okay, stop there for just 1 second. So they're going to travel
Gotcha.
3 days
Mhm.
out of Jerusalem, right? They're traveling 3 days. They're going to pitch the tent on the borders of the Red Sea.
Got it.
And by a valley of water. Okay.
By the river. And it came to pass that he built an altar of stones and made an offering unto the Lord and gave thanks unto the Lord our God. And it came to pass that he called the name of the river Laman, and it emptied into the Red Sea, and the valley was in the borders near the mouth thereof. And when my father saw that the waters of the river emptied into the fountain of the Red Sea, he spake unto Laman, saying, Oh, that thou mightest be like unto this river, continually running into the fountain of all righteousness. And now Laman's offended. And he also spoke unto Lemuel, Oh, that thou mightest be like unto this valley, firm and steadfast and immovable in keeping the commandments of the Lord.
Great, thank you. So they're going to travel 3 days. They're going to come to the borders of the Red Sea. This is not necessarily a short distance.
I was going to ask, so like, what is...
It's doable. It's doable in that span of time, but it's not really a short distance per se. But just bear in mind that they're able to travel enough that you can see it on the map in 3 days.
Okay.
That's really what matters. They're going to go all the way from Jerusalem down to the borders of the Red Sea, which is enough that if you're looking at a map, you can actually see that line without like having to do any hyper zoom or anything like that. Okay. Now here's the thing. They're going to hang out here in the Valley of Lemuel for a lot of chapters. In fact, they're going to do that all the way until we get to chapter 16. So let's jump all the way over to chapter 16.
Okay. I'm ready.
Cool.
First Nephi 16.
And so there's like a whole bunch of yada, yada, yada in verses 1 through 5. And then verse 6 says, Now all these things were said and done as my father dwelt in a tent in the valley, which he called Lemuel. And that is where we know just how long we have now spent in Lemuel, 15 chapters. So that's both visions of the tree of life. That is some arguing. That's a couple of trips back to Jerusalem to do a murder and then to get some brides. And
because those are really all you need in the wilderness. A little bit of murder, a little bit of women.
Yeah. And they also stole Zoram as well. So
that's right. I forgot people stealing.
Can't forget that.
Yeah, sorry about that, Zoram.
Yeah, our bad. So then in verse 9, the Lord speaks to Lehi and says, Hey, tomorrow take your journey into the wilderness, okay? And then Lehi wakes up, he goes out of his tent, and then he finds a ball of curious workmanship of fine brass, and it had 2 spindles. The one pointed the way whither we should go in the wilderness. What the other did, we may never know.
Weather? Maybe like sports stats? You want to keep up with the big football games that are going on? Maybe it's got...
Ooh, yeah, maybe it was his Facebook profile. It pointed to the Lord's Facebook profile.
That's important.
It is important to always want to have access. You want to know what the Lord has to say next. And I say it that way because we were told to replace the name of the church with the Savior or the Lord in a general conference talk or a BYU talk or something. And so, since the church has a social media account, the Lord has a social media account.
I did not know that. My goodness, what was I thinking?
I know. It presents other issues, and I will refer you over to Nemo the Mormon for all sorts of fun to be had with that issue. So they're going to take seed of every kind, and this will not be brought over into the New World, of course.
I was going to ask.
That would create some issues, correct? The text is not helpful with trying to keep old world crops out of the new world until Columbus, as it should if it were to be historically accurate. So they go across the river Layman. They're taking their journey. They're going to go for 4 days in a nearly southeast direction. They're going to pitch their tents again, and they're going to call that place Shazer. So it was 3 days to go from Jerusalem to Lemuel. It's now going to be 4 days to go to Shazer. Let's just backtrack real quick here.
Okay.
I want to go to the apologist map. Okay, so here's the distance. Remember, it's 3 days to go from Jerusalem to Lemuel, and then it's 4 days to go from Lemuel to Shazer.
Yes.
Do we notice any differences in the sizes of those distances?
I'm feeling Shazer is awfully close.
I'm feeling Shazer is a little. You're able to go that far in 3 days, it taking you 4 days to go this other little bit. Straining my credulity a bit here, apologists. You got some work to do. Clean up your map.
Maybe they were
All
strolling, taking
it does it say, and we strolled to the place called Shazer? No, it doesn't. Since we traveled, it's the same word.
All right.
Yeah, it was a good try. It was a good try. No, so all right, so they're going to be in Shazer. They're going to be in Shazer for the space of of a little bit, and then they're going to go forth again in the same direction, keeping in the most fertile parts of the wilderness, which were in the borders near the Red Sea. Okay, so I do want to hover back to this. Let's go back to that apologist map just real quick again. We're going to go several days. We're going to hang out in the most fertile parts by the borders of the Red Sea. Okay. Now they're doing this for the space of many days until they get to the spot where Nephi breaks his bow. Are they by the borders of the Red Sea the whole? I mean, there's a spot where they look really close to the Red Sea. I could go out. There's a little stretch here. Then there's some parts that they get pretty inland.
I was going to say that seems pretty far away from the border of the Red Sea there.
Now, and is this the most fertile part? I mean, and why are they worried about? I mean, other than like needing game or like berries to pick, why are they worried about being in the most fertile parts per se? I doubt that they're planting crops along the way.
Well, and why would they need that with the divine intervention? They should be able to just go at,
fair point. I mean, granted, if they've got the divine intervention, they should be able to just kind of step through like a fold in space time and be able to just kind of wind up where they need to go.
Where is the TARDIS? Come on,
where
guys.
Where is the TARDIS? Exactly. So okay, but we're gonna be fair here. So they're gonna go. We've got Jerusalem, we've got Lemuel, we've got Shazer, and we've gone 3 days to get to Lemuel. We're going 4 days to get to Shazer, and then we're gonna go many days in the same direction as before to get to the place where Nephi's gonna break his bow. Now, how far is many days? I don't know.
Because that's a significant little chunk on that map right there.
It's at least 5 days. And you're right. They do say that this is, like the apologists say, this is a pretty big distance. Many days.
Because it took them, what'd you say? You said 3 days from Jerusalem to the Valley of Lemuel.
4 days to get to Shazer. And then many days.
Right. So we're looking at least 7 days. And if you take the distance from Jerusalem to Shazer, that's one. Yeah. That's many days. Okay.
Yeah. Many days is okay.
That's an amount.
It's some quantity. We don't know. That's the fact of the matter. We don't know how many days that is. Okay, so they're going to keep following the directions of the ball. They travel for the space of many days. In verse 17 and verse 18, Nephi breaks his bow, and they're super mad at him, and then they murmur against the Lord, and there's more murmuring going on because they're hungry. And then Layman and Lemuel, their bows had lost their springs, so
there's not a lot to do in the woods. What else you can do? Murmur?
You got to do some murmuring at this point. It's better than murdering, honestly.
I mean, of the two M's,
we are actually improving right now, I think,
we're
in our
doing better.
moral quality.
Getting better, guys. Good job.
Nephi in verse 23 says, "Hey, Dad, where should I go to get some food?" Lehi feels bad that he's been complaining about God, and so then he says, "All right, let me look at the Liahona," which at this point in time is only called the Ball and will not be called the Liahona until Alma. And then they get some writing on the Ball.
I feel really bad because, sorry. I feel really bad because every time this part, I just picture Tom Hanks holding Wilson talking to this ball. And I'm so sorry. Carry on.
Honestly, it may have, they've been in the desert a long time now. Many days they've been in the desert. Well, what they see something written on the ball, and whatever they see causes fear and trembling, exceeding fear and trembling. And that does it for the whole family. So, you know, something was written on there. Super, super cool and spooky.
That they don't share with us, though.
That they just do not share with us.
We don't get to know.
We do not. So then, so Nephi's going to go all the way up to the top of a mountain, and then he's going to find some wild beasts, and he's gonna kill those wild beasts, and they're going to eat, and there's going to be much rejoicing. Yay!
I feel like Nephi needs to discuss that the way he handles stuff is killing things, and I don't know that that's the healthiest way.
There is a lot of wanton bloodshed in First and Second Nephi.
I was upset, so I went and killed a dude and stole his sword and pretended to be him and his servants and all of his stuff, and then I went and killed some beasts. Nephi, there's got to be a healthier way to work through your stuff.
He just maybe needs a good therapist and a whole lot of counseling and maybe a bit of prison time. Okay, so in verse 32, he comes back with the food. There's much rejoicing. They humble themselves, give thanks, and then verse 33, we get the hot stuff here. So they're going to begin traveling again. It says, "And it came to pass that we did again take our journey, traveling the same course as in the beginning." So that is the same course as they were taking when they were in Shazer. They're going the same direction. Okay. And they are going to travel for the space of many days. And then they pitch their tents that we might tarry for the space of a time.
I love how definitive.
It's very specific. Now, are these two spaces of many days the same number of many days, or are they different numbers of many days? The fact of the matter is, we don't know. I do not land in the camp of thinking that it is the same number of many days, but you have no way of discerning from this text which it is. And they're finally at Nahom. So in verse 34, it comes to pass that Ishmael dies and is buried in the place called Nahom, which was called Nahom. And they mourn, and there's some murmurings again, and they're sad, and
another murmuring, mourning, murder.
Yep.
This podcast episode brought to you by the letter M.
The letter M. Yeah. Also for many days, I suppose, from the letter M. Okay. So what we have, though, is just they're traveling for the space of many days, tarrying, many days. And we have a vector, we have a direction that they're going. We have no idea, though, how long they're going in those directions. It could be 5 days because 4 days got counted. 5 days could be many. We don't know. And it could be 100 days. And if they're traveling at the speed that they left Jerusalem for 100 days, they're going to fall off the Arabian Peninsula right quick. So I don't know. I don't know what to do with this. And so what I get is basically this. And what you have on this map is textually viable left turns at that left turn at Albuquerque. These are all textually viable.
If they take any of those other ones, Nahom can't be Nahom, though.
Exactly. I mean, that's exactly it. The site that apologists have put can't be it, if that's the case. But these are all viable in the text. And so now you have to privilege one particular interpretation of the text above the others in order for it to fit an apologetic. And why should we do that? What in the text compels us to do that? And that's the issue, right? So when we have the Iliad and we're trying to find Troy, we have these certain lines of evidence that we're using. We have these certain features that we are looking for. We know we kind of have a general location, and we know we need to be up against a certain thing. And then there will be city walls that are going to look like this, and there's going to be a certain style to all of this. And we've got all these little things that we're looking for that are going to act as lines of evidence until we find Troy, and we did it. What about the text? What about anything that we just went through lines up Nahom with Nim, with NHM? What lines it up with those altars? What lines it up with any of that?
And you can't assume that they're going to be moving at the same pace, because as you're reading through the scriptures, it talks about, Ishmael growing older and dying. So the speed that they were able to leave Jerusalem with, they've got this ailing man with them now who, I'm assuming he just didn't wake up one day and go, and die. So there's got to be a progression of him slowing down, which is going to be slowing them down. So it just makes it harder.
Taking the apologist route, though, and kind of mapping it on and trying to figure out the whole distance, it comes out to about, if I recall correctly, 3,500 kilometers. So about 2,000 miles all around.
Okay.
That's not nothing, right? That is a lengthy trip.
I was going to say that's a bit.
It's a bit, right? But the continental United States is larger than that across. And we'll remember that a lot of our pioneer ancestors made similar journeys in much less time with aging elderly people, with
in
people who were sick, in
and
hand carts, and really bad circumstances, right? And still doing that in a matter of a few months for what is going to take Nephi, Lehi, and company 8 years to do.
They strolled.
So this is the problem that I have with this, is that because the timelines and because of the lack of specificity, you can put Nahom just about anywhere you want. You can put Bountiful just about anywhere that you want. And if you want to add additional things to the text, because the text is so non-specific, that why not? You could kind of construct a story that, like, they took a ferry and went across the Gulf there on the east side of Arabia and ended up in the Indian subcontinent. And if I wanted to do that, well, guess what I wind up with? The benefit of smelting of iron ore. The ability to smelt iron ore is much, much more historically proximate on the Indian subcontinent than it is in Arabia or anywhere else in the world. They are, at the earliest, about 80 years away from the first possible instance of being able to smelt iron ore on the Indian subcontinent. That technology is not going to be available for another few hundred years in West and the Mediterranean and around the Red Sea and all of that. That technology to smelt iron ore is hundreds of years away from Nephi and that region. But on the Indian subcontinent, it's only like 80. So it's still an anachronism, but dang, I got a lot closer just by adding a little bit extra to the text.
Yeah. And is that not by design, though? If something is so vague, you can't disprove it, but you can't prove it either, but you can't disprove it. So.
Exactly. So there's this challenge that comes. So like Dan Peterson, it was at a conference for FAIR, and he makes this point that, or this argument, that the Book of Mormon has survived far longer than it should if it wasn't true. My point back to that was like, what does that even mean, for one? Like, that is a meaningless statement, because how long should the Book of Mormon have survived? Like, how long should the Quran have survived? How long should the Bhagavad Gita have survived? Right. How long should the Bible have survived? Like, none that is a meaningless statement.
Because, okay, so if you want to go back to that, say, well, then why do all of these folklore stories survive when,
Right. How long should the belief in elves have survived if it's not true?
Right.
And yet that has persisted and has taken over our mythology in the modern world in different ways, in the ways that we kind of engage with those ideas. Like,
but in defense, elves are real.
In defense, sure.
So, watch yourself,
yeah.
Perry.
Right.
Don't come
my
for
bad. My bad. I overstepped on that one. I'm sorry there. But no, like all these ideas, like they that are not true, or that at least Dan Peterson wouldn't take as true. They have survived, and they've survived longer than the Book of Mormon has. So who is he to say how long this text should have survived? We are not anybody to say how long these things should have happened for, because myth is weird. Myth survives and persists in ways that, like, yeah, when you try to apply rational like processes to it, it doesn't make sense, but that's human brains. Like, human brains are kind of silly like that.
There are stories with dragons that are older than these scriptural texts. So
and those ideas persisted and continue to persist for how long? It was a silly point on his part, and that whole thing just distracted me from my previous point that
it is a silly place.
This whole thing is a silly place. So that, like, apologists are making these arguments off of like really frail, fragile ideas. I've lost my train of thought on the whole point.
I'm so sorry.
In there, and bringing that up, that the Book of Mormon should have persisted far longer, or has persisted far longer than it should have, if it's not true. Yeah, I completely lost that train of thought. I'm sorry.
Sorry, man. That was 100.
No,
I did not help at all.
That's, my little neurodivergent brain on that too, kind of latching onto it. I'm not sure that I'll ever get that back either. But no, ultimately it's like, it's in the that's what it was. It's in the vagueness that it survives. It's in the ambiguities that it survives. It's in the not touching on these, like, on super specific details. That's where it survives. That's where it thrives. By not being super specific about where Nahom is, where Shazer is, by not saying this is how long we traveled for this many days and we stopped. And then we could actually say, like, we can say roughly where Lemuel would be. We can actually guess that. Now, the sites that apologists propose, are kind of dumb, but we can at least say roughly where that would be. They're right. That where they put that bubble of where they put the value of Lemuel, that is a generally correct place to put it. Where they try to put Shazer, they need to work on that based off where they put Lemuel, but, like, it's still generally kind of right. Where they're putting the rest of this stuff, though, you have no way of saying, textually speaking, whether it's right or wrong. And that's drives me nuts. And when I have this conversation with apologists, especially armchair apologists, that point does not seem to sink in, because they then latch onto this thing where it's like, oh, but there's a candidate site for Bountiful, and we have the letters there, so it matches. So these have to be it. Like, no, there's nothing in the text that compels that reading. All of these other options are valid sites to put Nahom and to put Bountiful. And there's even more, because if I wanted to add additional stuff to the text that isn't there, like if I want to say that they interacted with people on the trail, and that's what put them on. They're on the Frankincense Trail. They had interactions with other people along the way. They were at a trading market, and they were able to actually pay to have like a proper burial for Ishmael. That's what apologists, by the way, honestly want to be able to argue. So I'm not really strawmanning that. But if they want to be able to say that, then why can't we add in, hey, there was a guy who had a shipping route that went between the Arabian Peninsula and the Indian subcontinent, and they were able to travel with him to get to the Indian subcontinent. And at that point in time, what does it matter? What, now you don't have Bountiful in that spot anymore. You don't necessarily have Nahom in that spot. Nahom could be in the Indian subcontinent at that point.
Well, and that always confused me, because as they're on this large trade route, they never mention anybody. Like they don't say we stopped at a market. They don't say, and we ran into Phil from Frankfurt, and he's there's not ever anybody else.
And I would almost be willing to forgive that in this Arabian context, if and we'll get into a little bit on the issues with DNA in the Book of Mormon when we talk about Jacob. There's a section where I want to talk about DNA in the Book of Mormon in association with Jacob. It's a weird spot to put it, but
DNA.
Yes.
Okay, I'm excited.
We'll get into that a little bit. I would like to do a lot more in that than I think we'll have time for by then, but we'll get into that a little bit there because of some of the issues that come up. And I think Jacob chapter 7 is one of the best places to discuss that. Anyway, all that's a digression to get to, I would be willing to forgive, or at least accept this whole idea that, okay, maybe Nephi in this particular circumstance doesn't mention the existence of other people on the route because he's so focused on this family story and this family, like, that's what matters. That's the core of the story of these worshipers of Adonai making this exodus to escape to a new promised land. And that's what he wants to keep his focus on. Okay, why aren't we mentioning then the people that apologists insist had to have been in the New World already at the time that they get over? We'll get into that more when we get to Jacob 7. But
Okay.
I do want to touch on, I'm not as forgiving of that in light of the fact that, to your point, they're never mentioning any other people at any point in all of this. It's always
Ever.
just this family, always, for the full 1,000-year history.
And
I mean, granted, they do add the Mulekites, and they do, but that's small. That's a very small addition to this whole mix, and it's still, that also has its own.
Because there has got to have been, I mean, if me and my family are hanging out for 1,000 years, traveling continents and talking to God with our Wilson soccer ball, I feel like at some point there's going to have been somebody important enough in the story that didn't start with us in Jerusalem. There's just no correlation to anybody else. That
there's no attempt for them to, there's no attempt to convert along the way. Like, you're not proselytizing. You're not. So anyway, it's
God's given you magic sky meat, and you're not going to tell anybody about it.
Exactly. That's exactly it. Now, remember, the magic sky meat is a reference to the Exodus account as well. So we've talked about textual dependencies before. That is one of those very clear textual dependencies on the Exodus account. All right.
I wonder if I could get some magic DoorDash. Is that an option?
I don't know. Does DoorDash run this late? I have no idea. I haven't been in the U.S. for so long.
My town shuts down at 8:00, and so that's a hard no.
There you go. So one thing I will say is that there are some criteria for what bountiful would be. Bountiful is a place where you're going to find bees, flowers, iron ore, and wood for building a transoceanic vessel.
Obviously.
So bees are all over the place on the Arabian Peninsula, and they're also all over the place on the Indian subcontinent. So wherever you want to put bountiful, you're going to find bees. There's a specific species of honeybee that's in the that's on the Arabian Peninsula. It's kind of interesting to study or to learn a little bit about. They are not so geographically constrained as to any one particular candidate site for bountiful being favored over another. So if we want to narrow down this left turn, we would want to find a good bountiful, and there isn't necessarily anything that privileges in that one site over another.
There's not going to be, so there's not a Troy 2. I mean, obviously there's not
really
a Troy
there
2
isn't.
in this
Now,
scenario.
At one of their favorite sites, they have found iron ore, so that's neat.
Is it time frame accurate?
I mean, iron ore is just going to be iron ore. It's just going to be there.
Well, I mean,
is it time frame accurate? No, the whole account of smelting iron ore is not time frame accurate.
They're so far not in that time frame. Okay.
I mean, that's the issue too, and the way they've tried to defend that. Okay. I was not going to go into this, but I'm going into this.
I'm so sorry. I did not mean to pull us off.
Okay.
But this is super interesting to me.
One of the ways they've tried to defend this one particular bountiful site is because they found a certain type of iron ore. It's an iron oxide, and it's supposed to melt at a lower temperature than another type of iron. The problem is that melting point is still so far in excess of what was possible at the time that it doesn't matter. It solved nothing for you. And that difference is like 60 degrees Fahrenheit. It's stupid. Okay. It's a bad argument. They need to stop it. Iron ore, the ability to smelt iron ore at that time just didn't exist. This is another ahistorical story. It has as much of a historical foundation as the killing of Laban. Stop it. Okay. And for the building of a transatlantic vessel, or transoceanic vessel, I'm not going to touch that one at all. John Larson, Mormon Expressions podcast, has already dealt with that in enough detail. I'm going to leave it there. Another story that's just completely ahistorical.
That's not necessarily true, because when I was a Girl Scout, I built a boat out of a cardboard box. God didn't give me a soccer ball to help me.
Did you sail across an ocean with a family and through a tempest?
I sank halfway into Jopal Lake.
Bingo.
But I made it halfway.
I mean, I do believe you fully in that. Every detail of your story, I believe, because that all fits within the realm of being, like people do that. People build cardboard boats and they sink in the middle of lakes. It happens.
And
And
Laban and Lemuel and them didn't have duct tape. I did have duct tape though, so that could have been a big game changer.
Honestly, actually, if you had duct tape, it would have probably been more efficient for building a transatlantic or a transoceanic vessel than the technology available to Nephi trying to build one on his own.
So why didn't God give them some sky duct tape with the sky meat?
Well, supposedly he teaches them how to build a vessel in a way that defies the laws of physics, because that's the only explanation for this. God, like it says in the text that God taught Nephi how to build it, and it wasn't like the way that men think about approaching it and all of that. So shut up about it.
At least the ark had some dimensions. Come on, Book of Mormon.
Yeah, we'll talk about the flood, I'm sure, at some point in time, and if not, maybe I'll do another little special on the flood problem in Latter-day Saint literature.
And the rains came down and the floods came. Primary.
Yeah, definitely. Other issues. Look up the heat problem if you're interested in that. Honestly, if you want to see how the flood did not happen, the heat problem. Not even Answers in Genesis, who is obsessed with trying to find scientific explanations for Genesis events, gets beyond it was sky magic that allowed the flood to happen.
Oh, but we've already found the ark. It's on Mount Ararat. We know what happened there.
Are you really going to make me bring up Dan McClellan? I was not going to bring up Dan McClellan in this episode.
Trying. I was pushing for some Dan. There it is.
He talks about Ron Wyatt's finds on multiple episodes. Just, look up one of those. It'll deal with that.
If you ask my neighbor Jenny, she'll tell you that God is all around us and that if we just had a little more faith, everything would be fine. So it's clearly our own fault.
We're going to talk about the problem of evil next week, by the way. And
I'm sorry, carry on. I completely
that is next week's episode. Please join us for that episode when we finally get into Second Nephi. All right, so let's just do a bit of a brief summary here. So we've talked through all the text and all of that. The only fixed site that we have in this journey is Jerusalem. It's the only place we know for sure where it was. We then go for a few days, and for getting to 3 days to get to Lemuel, 4 days to get to Shazer. Beyond that, there are no specific amounts of time given. So we don't know the speed of travel, right? And even if we were to try to use assumptions about how fast people travel, we don't know for how long. So we have no way of determining the distances between these points. We just know, it's basically if I were to give you a map and were to tell you to go from Los Angeles to New York, and what you're going to do is you're going to go to Phoenix, and you're going to tarry in Phoenix for a couple of days. Then you're going to travel many days, and you're going to go to Chicago. And then what you're going to do is you're going to tarry in Chicago for a few days, and then you're going to go in an easterly direction, and you're going to go for many days before you arrive at New York. Can you, off of those instructions alone, make that distance? Now, you're probably able to make that in your mind because you know what those places are. But off of those instructions alone, could you make that journey? And
I could make it in 8 years.
Yeah, probably. Zigzagging up and down.
8 years. Right. I could make it in 8 years.
Right. The fact of the matter is you wouldn't be able to reconstitute the route that you took or anything like that.
Oh, yeah, no way.
So it's, yeah, the text the text itself does not place Nahom anywhere except somewhere along probably the western coast of the Arabian Peninsula. That is where it puts Nahom. Fair. And that is a distance of a lot of miles. I think 1,000 miles, but it's a lot. Let's talk about another little wrinkle. We'll spend just a few minutes on this. The Lehi Travels document is a certain bit of potentially prophetic writing by potentially Joseph Smith, depending on how well you accept the provenance of this particular document. When I say written by Joseph Smith, it's written by Joseph Smith the same way everything was written by Joseph Smith. He dictated it and somebody else wrote it down. Yeah.
Yep.
He said, here are the words, and somebody else, please write this for me. Okay. Now,
but don't show it to your wife because it'll just go missing.
But show it to my wife for me, please, Hiram, because I'm too scared to do it myself.
Exactly. That's accurate.
Okay. Have you watched Under the Banner of Heaven? I'm going off so many digressions. I'm sorry.
Yes.
If you've watched Under the Banner of Heaven, like there's the scene where Joseph is sitting across from Emma and he's like reading like DNC 132 to her. I'm like, okay, like this is brilliantly done, except he was too much of a coward to do that himself in this part.
I was gonna say there's no way.
Sorry, I'm like being a little bit froggy today. I'm being a little bit extra critical. I'm sorry. I should not have used the word coward to describe Joseph Smith when talking about polygamy and threatening his wife with destruction if she didn't practice polygamy.
How dare you?
How dare? Yep. That was a little bit of an overreach on my part, and I apologize. I was caught up in the moment. Okay.
So was Joseph. Sorry, go ahead. I'm listening.
Sorry. Yeah, like I was alluding to, we'll get this like one apologetic episode where you're going to probably have to hold me back from being a little bit too spicy. This is a little bit spicier than I intended. All right. If the provenance of the Lehi Travels document were to hold, then what it would indicate is that Lehi and his family were intended to have made their left turn at the 19th north parallel. Nahom, as apologists have located it, is at about the 15.5 north parallel.
Okay.
Which is a lot of miles wrong. Yeah.
I was going to say that.
It's a big difference. So yeah. Dan Vogel,
and just to play devil's advocate, there's no way that you could make that from the 19th parallel to where there's no way to justify or to fudge that to where it would work.
Not in a way of keeping the story historical. It does work, though. It does weirdly work if you were to take the map of the Arabian Peninsula that is located in the 1769 edition of the KJV. Assuming that what I have been able to dig up on that is actually accurate. I don't own a copy of the 1769 edition of the KJV, so I can't be 100% certain that the map that I've seen is accurate. But the Arabian Peninsula in that kind of has reverse dimensions from how it is in reality. It's super scrunched up and super long. And
doesn't it also have like sea monsters on that map though? So I mean,
that's a whole other thing. That's a whole other thing. And the map is not accurate. The map is not accurate at all. But it's the map that Joseph likely would have had access to, like most likely would have had access to. And so if he's trying to put Nahom in the bottom left corner of the map and then say an 8-year journey overall, well, honestly, the way that map is set up kind of makes sense. But then we put so much of Joseph into this version of the account that, yeah, it's, and you've also kind of, the apologist then lose the, well, how would he have known? He wouldn't have. He just put a place at the bottom left corner and then he had to turn left and then said it took 8 years to do that.
Because that's a number.
Because it's a number. Because it's 1/5 of the Exodus. I don't know. I don't know if that was actually the thought process, but it is 1/5 of the Exodus.
See that y'all, you and Joseph are putting way more thought than I. That's why I'm not a prophet, guys. I have
no idea if there's anything intentional about that, and I'm not necessarily trying to say that there was. I have wondered if there is a certain intentionality of having the Lehite Exodus be 1/5 the length of the Israelite Exodus from Egypt, when there is so much textual dependency.
It's got the sky meat. It's got, like you said, it's Exodus Junior. So
yeah. I'm also unclear of when the 8-year count starts. The language at the beginning of chapter 17 is a bit vague. And so it's not clear if the 8-year count starts from when they left Jerusalem or if it starts from basically when they leave Nahom. I lean in the direction of it being from when they start from Jerusalem. I think that makes more sense. And it could just be a trick of 19th century English being what it was. But the way that it currently is represented, I'm a little bit unclear on exactly how long the journey was. It was a minimum of 8 years. So I just go with that number because it seems to be what everybody else does as well. And I will be nothing but a lemming on that particular one because I don't really have much more skin in that fight.
So looking at that map, though, from Nahom to not sailing across the ocean, that's a really short distance for 8 years.
It's a very short distance. It makes a little bit more, it at least visually makes a little bit more sense if you have no sense of scale and are looking at the 1769 edition of the KJV's map of the Holy Land. Then all of a sudden,
that would mean it's not scripture.
Okay.
That would mean it's not scripture, Perry. That's not true.
Well, a community of Christ still holds it as scripture, but they've rejected the historicity of it. So there are ways of holding this as scripture without holding the historicity. But
we know it's a totally historically accurate document.
That's just it. It's not historical at this point in time. I think
that, no, I agree.
We're gonna put the death knell in that eventually, but I intended to put forward a much more very positive case of the apologetic arguments for this, but this is the best that they've got. And that video from Scripture Central this week just kind of broke me on if this is the best you guys have, all right.
Yeah.
But let's actually go over. Sorry, one note. Watch the video here by Dan Vogel. It's great, talking about the Lehi Travels document and its provenance and all that. You may be able to make a determination on your own of how much you want to accept the provenance of this particular document and whether or not it's actually what's intended, by the authors of the Book of Mormon. Okay. And I'll leave that to you to decide how you want to engage with that. I am not 100% sold, but Dan Vogel makes a great case for why we should consider it as having prophetic, the intent of prophetic authority.
All right.
Let's go just a little bit through these lines of evidence. They put forward the 4 lines: the place called Nahom, the fact that there are burial grounds around, the altar dates being accurate, and then it being directly west of a candidate site for Bountiful. So it's fine. Yes, there is the passive voice here. The place called Nahom is interesting. It makes it seem like it was called that by somebody else. It's worth noting that the same naming convention is used in reference to the youngest sons of Lehi in 1 Nephi 18:7. So if we're going to put too much stock in that, then somebody else must have named Lehi's kids, or he stole them from somebody. Because
I mean, at this point, is that really out of the realm of possibility? We're murdering people. We are.
When we can add anything to the realm of possibility in this text, then anything is possible. So
because maybe we were in South Arabia, maybe we were on a different continent. I mean, I really feel like anything could have been the situation.
Right. Yeah. So I don't necessarily put too much stock in this issue either. It's an interesting thing worth noting, but I also don't put a whole lot of stock into the idea that the passive voice is used for Nahom and that being necessarily meaningful. Here's the thing. The place was called Nahom in the text of the Book of Mormon, but the place in the real world is called Nim. Actually, the people are called Nim. Their place that they attribute their people to is called Nim. There are other pronunciations like Nahom or however else you want to take that pronunciation. What apologists have to assert is that the place called Nahom was called NHM, and that it was Nephi through Joseph that called it Nahom. And at that point in time, we're making a distinction without difference. And then they go through with it's because the term Nahum in Hebrew, which will be the name of the book Nahum in the Old Testament, deals with consolation and mourning and receiving a rest from your sadness and your grief, and that's what is going on here. They're at Nahum, they're burying Ishmael, and so Nephi is doing a play on words where he's taking this name and he's changing it around, but then Nephi is calling it Nahom, not the people. And so if you're going to put a whole bunch of stock into this passive voice, it's just there's so much effort put into the passive voice. Substantiate it. If it's going to be meaningful, it either means something or it doesn't. And I'm fine. Whatever. It's different. I'm not going to put any additional stock into it because I don't have any reason to.
Okay. Okay.
It's near burial grounds. There were a bunch of people. Every time that there are people, there are burial grounds. There were a lot of people in the NHM, in the area that has the NHM designation. Yeah, there are burial grounds. Now, what's exciting, we found the grave that has the name of Ishmael somewhere. Super, super cool, right? Super interesting and fascinating that there's a grave that has the name of Ishmael. And there were like 6 actually that were found in that particular area. Neil Rappley does a great job talking about this. He also does a great job of pointing out that we have no way of pointing out that that is the Ishmael of the Book of Mormon. And Dr. John Lundwall on Mormonism Live this week did a great job in pointing out that those gravestones often have like deity identifications on there. Like basically this person would have been a worshiper of some god or another, or they're looking for the favor of this particular deity for this person. Adonai is not on any of those Ishmael gravestones in the area. And we would expect for, if they're going through all this trouble of burying Ishmael in the area and doing a grave designator, grave marker, and all of that with Ishmael's name on it, that they would include the divine name Adonai on there to signify that.
So were there other deities named on the Ishmaels?
That's my understanding. That's my understanding. So that other deities are named on there.
There is religious deities on there, just not
Adonai
one. Right. Got it. Okay.
So probably not that Ishmael. So Neil Rappley, I guess call us when you have halfway decent evidence instead of just throwing the spaghetti against the wall and nothing sticking. The NHM altar does, in fact, all 3 altars date to the right time. They would have been there before Lehi would have. They're also a gift from a dude dedicated to some gods. A gift from a dude. It does nothing more but then mention the Nim tribe that had inhabited the region for a long time. That's it.
Okay. I'm sold. It's real.
Directly west of the candidate site for Bountiful. This was the 4th line of evidence that they were going with. It is true. It's also notable that there are several candidate sites. And why are we favoring that one in particular over the others? The only reason why we're favoring that one Bountiful site, that one candidate Bountiful site over these others, frankly, is because it's directly east of the site that we favor for Nahom. So we're doing a circle in the reasoning here. We're not really substantiating with anything. So
if this one fake thing is true, then this other fake thing is true. But if this fake thing is true, clearly this fake thing is true. So now it's all true.
So if I take
not fake,
if I take one like very, very improbable event, and I take another very, very improbable event, like very, very improbable, both events are. But so this is event A, this is event B. If event A happens, though, B will almost certainly be true. Okay. So they're both very, very unlikely. But if A does in fact occur, B will almost certainly happen.
Got it. I'm on board.
Does that mean that B happened?
Got it. Okay.
This is what apologists are arguing. They are arguing that B happened because if it's really, really likely that if A happens, then B happened, B must have happened because these 2 unlikely events could have possibly happened. This is so it's
irrefutable.
Look at Bayes' theorem and try to parse out what the Wikipedia article has to say on it. It's definitely a bit of a mess. Trying to read through any sort of math on Wikipedia is a nightmare. But what you see is that anytime that you take 2 events that have a certain probability of occurring, and then you have a dependency of like if A, then B, this is the chance of that happening, it doesn't work in the favor of the event becoming more likely. It's actually less likely that the claim is true. And you have to weigh it in all of that. And Bayes' theorem is just does not favor any of these claims. So if we were to go about finding it, we could try to use the text. We're living in the unclear, non-specific language of the Book of Mormon to try and make that work. But rather than the text looking like it was written by somebody who was actually familiar with going through those regions and writing detailed accounts of what they did, where they were going, how long it took them to travel, it looks like somebody who knew nothing about the place, wrote some stuff down, said this is where these people were traveling to, and then apologists have done the legwork in trying to make those two things, the real world and what's described in the text, fit together. And they've been able to do that by assuming the conclusion that the Book of Mormon is true. But if you take the stance of, I don't know, I want to see if it's true, let me see what the text says for itself and compare that to what we actually know about reality, it doesn't stack up. Basically, you could never have used the Book of Mormon itself as it is currently written to actually find the NHM altars. You could not have taken that and made that discovery outside of Marib. But apologists are more than happy to cram Nahom into the find, even though it has no place being there.
Right. So
at the end of the day, is NHM Nahom the absolute best that we would be able to say it's a valid candidate site? The most generous, most friendly statement we can make at this point is it is a valid candidate site. Can't rule it out.
I will co-sign on that.
What that does not mean is that it is the site intended by the text. When we looked at Troy, we clearly were able to find the site intended by the Iliad. Now, the Iliad, we all know, is myth. We all accept that as myth. In fact, even his author, the ascribed author, may have been mythic. But it is very clear that there is a historical core to all of that. The Book of Mormon, on the other hand, purports to be a history, but it is less evidentially supported by like these archaeological finds than the Iliad, which we all accept as myth. And I don't know why taking the best evidence available for the Book of Mormon, the single best piece of evidence for the Book of Mormon, we would then be able to walk forward and say with any confidence there's even a degree of historicity to this, especially in light of everything else that we've looked at. But we're not done beating this particular section of the Book of Mormon to death.
Oh, I'm so excited.
All right. So we've looked at the best that the Book of Mormon has to offer, and I'm tired. I'm sure you're tired. And so we're going to do a special live stream. This episode here is going to come out in the middle of the week. We are on Saturday, February 3rd, 8 Mountain. We are going to do a live stream episode talking about Deutero-Isaiah and the Book of Mormon. And my hope is that by the time we are done with that episode, we will be done talking about Book of Mormon historicity. We will instead be talking about some of the other issues and some of the apologetics that come up. But we're not going to be using our historicity scale anymore and saying, oh, this is where it fits on this, that, or the other thing. We're done with that because, the next episode is not favorable. So we have dealt with the most favorable evidence for the Book of Mormon. And at the end of all of that, how confident are you feeling, LoLo?
Oh, just so confident. No, not at all. Just saying.
Like 0 to 100 on historicity. Like I might with this Nahom find you find me at my most generous, which I'm not right now, but you find me at my most generous on this one, I might be able to give you a 1% historicity.
I was going to say maybe
you named Jerusalem,
one, maybe two.
You named Jerusalem, you named the King Zedekiah in his first year and all of that. You got that stuff accurate. That was from the Bible.
Right.
And then there is this place that maybe lines up. Potentially. It's a viable candidate site. And that's it. That's what you got. So
come on, guys.
After next week, though, I'm gonna probably be sitting pretty comfortably in the 0% camp. For anything that meaning, like in the same way that Spider-Man is 0% historical, even though it names a real city.
It's more historically provable. Anyway, you're good. I agree. Yes.
Yeah. So join us for the special live stream episode next week when we get after the Deutero-Isaiah problem in the Book of Mormon. And this one's a doozy. This one is a doozy for apologists. Yeah, seriously, it's gonna be a time.
Makeup on.
Yeah, we're in for a good one. We're in for a good one. So join us then. I am super excited for it. But LoLo, thank you so much.
Thank you, Perry.
And don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, share this with all of your friends and family, especially your friends who are super, super gung-ho about the Nahom thing. Just tell them, just watch this one, and you'll see just how much it's not that great of evidence. And join us next time, just a few days from now, when we talk about Deutero-Isaiah and put this historicity question to bed. Thank you.
Thank you, Perry. Thank you, everybody.